When I was 17, the Japanese bombed Pearl Harbor, and being patriotic like most Americans at that time, I tried to join the service. And I thought the Air Force would be the very place for me, except I'm colorblind and they turned me down. And later I tried to get in the Navy, and they also turned me down. And I was told that if the Air Force and the Navy turned you down, the Army would turn you down. But I was able to get in when I was 19, in 1943. The first place I was to report was Camp Walters, Texas. And I stayed there a short time, and they transferred me to Georgia for infantry basic. And after about 4 months of infantry basic, they declared we was ready for combat, I suppose, and shipped overseas, and wound up in a camp in Wales. And while I was at Wales, they assigned me to the 82nd Airborne Division. Once I was assigned to the 82nd Airborne, they transferred me to England to the headquarters for the 82nd Airborne Division, and I was to be trained to be a glider pilot, along with 16 other fellows. But their Air Force had people who flunked out of flight training, but had sufficient training to be a glider pilot, so they transferred those there and just assigned us to the 82nd. And we were just part of it, and not the normal projection of getting in 82nd Division. Well, yes, I enjoyed the training. The training was quite intense, and there was a lot of physical training. We'd get out and run 5 miles before breakfast in the morning, and a few little things like that. And we'd do push-ups, 50 push-ups just any time. So it was really physical training, but we also had training to be a glider pilot. And I flew in the gliders, American glider and a British glider. British glider is much bigger than American glider, and while we were taking our little flight in the British glider, the landing gear fell off. We was not aware of that, but when the glider came down, the pilot was aware of it though. And he didn't land on the runway, he landed on the grass, and we wondered why. But when he landed and held it up as long as he could, the landing gear caught on the grass, and the glider pilot was aware of it, but we weren't. But we just flipped right over, head over
tea kettle.
Head over tea kettle, and no one was hurt. We didn't have seat belts or anything, but we were just riding. But no one was hurt, but we did bang around a little. The night of D-Day, about midnight, or shortly before, we took off, and it was raining. General Eisenhower came down and talked to some of the fellows in our division and wished us luck and so forth. But we flew, and some of them landed in water, and some landed in little cities, and it was very difficult. But for me, it was quite uneventful. But I did live through it, and after 32 days, we were relieved and went back to England. And the reason for our relief was that General Eisenhower thought that it'd be necessary for us to jump in front of some particular place, but they got the tanks going so fast that they didn't really need us there. And so our next jump was in Holland. It's called a Market Garden. The morning we left from Market Garden was a nice day, and we flew uneventful, but we did have a little flak at times, but we landed uneventful. But soon after we got there, the war started. We was in a big war there. The battle we found ourselves in was a very defensive battle. We were paratroopers, and we found ourselves fighting tanks, and of course we wasn't prepared for that, but it was a little overwhelmed, at least in my opinion. But we was there. We jumped on September the 17th, and everything went according to specification, I suppose, until October the 3rd, and it was night, and there's a fellow named John Martin and I was in a foxhole, and a hand grenade went off, and the hand grenade did a lot of damage to my friend John. I wasn't hurt too bad, but I was unconscious for a while. And when I came to, I saw a German tank not very far off, and a couple of German soldiers walking around looking in the holes, and you know, I had my rifle, so I just took care of those two fellas. And here the tank came right at me and ran right over the hole I was in. And of course I was unconscious again. But I did have several broken ribs, 7 I think, broken shoulder blade, and a few odds and ends. But the Germans dug me out of this hole, and here I was, a prisoner of war, which I'd never dreamed of being, but I was. And the Germans, some of them could speak English, and they talked to me, and I didn't think I was hurt very bad. But later on, they got sore, and it was very difficult. They didn't put me in a hospital, but they did tell me that as soon as I got assigned to a permanent camp that I would have hospital treatment. But they put me on the back of a pickup truck, a guard right beside me, of course, and drove to a camp where there was a German officer who interviewed me, and he wanted to know all about the 82nd Division, but he seemed to know more than I did. But anyway, after a while, he told them to take me away, and they took me to a castle, a real castle, and they had a ladder and a hole in the ceiling about 20 foot up. Those 2 German soldiers put that ladder up there and told me to go up, and I found 5 others from the 82nd Division. They talked to me a little, but here I was, my bones were beginning to hurt that were broken, and I had a difficult time, but next morning they interviewed us. Oh, they interrogated us, really. And they tried to pit one against the other, but we had agreed that we would not tell them anything, and we didn't. But they took movie pictures of us and called up firing squad, and because we didn't agree to give them our home address, they threatened us with a firing squad, but they didn't fire and we didn't talk. So later that day we walked 2 or 3 miles to a building, and they locked us up for the night, but they didn't feed us much. We only spent 2 nights in the castle, and then we walked some 2 or 3 miles to a building that they locked us up. And in this building, they didn't have any furniture of any kind, just a hard floor, and that didn't work too good with my sore back, but I made it. And that went on for 2 or 3 days, and they put us on a truck, and carried us to a camp, Camp 12A, and we stayed there for 2 or 3 weeks. And they'd tell us every day, tomorrow you're going to go to your regular camp. I asked for treatment, medical treatment. None was coming. No, I got nothing. I didn't even get an aspirin. But after about 3 weeks, they put us on a train. They gave us a little can of food with a hole in it, but it was for 2 people, not for 1. And it was about 3 o'clock in the afternoon, and they told us, you'll be in camp for breakfast in the morning. Well, we got on the train, but it seemed like the Americans or British, somebody had bombed a rail track, and in fact, one of the bombs was close enough to us that the shrapnel hit our car, but it didn't hurt anyone. But we was locked in that, no food, no water. Second day, no food, no water. The third day we got water, but we also got to our camp, which was Camp 7A, and it was at Moosburg, just 15 miles from Munich. And I got to see a doctor. He was a Frenchman, didn't speak English, but he had a helper that could speak English, and he talked to me, and he said I had broken ribs, and they put tape around me from my waist to my armpits, and it really felt good. That was the first relief I had. But from the hand grenade, though, I had a place on my hand cut pretty badly, and it didn't heal properly, and the doctor looked at it, and he got his scalpel out, and he was going to do some work on it or something, and I said, I think I'll just go back to camp and let the good Lord heal it, and I did. We were at Camp 7A for 5 months, and during that 5 months I lost 60 pounds. But we had a few little highlights. At Christmas time, they let us have a get-together just for the Americans, and we did what we should have done. We prayed and sang, and there's a few fellas who could really sing well, and they sang I'll Be Home for Christmas and things like that. Excuse me. But
that must have been really hard.
Well, it was hard then. Now it's not.
Yeah.
But we worked every day, though. We worked in Munich. They had put us on an electric train, and we'd ride the 15 miles to town to work in Munich and clean up the rubble after the bombs had hit the buildings, and sometimes work on the street or railroad, whatever they wanted us to do. I was assigned to a farm detail, and there was 20 of the soldiers assigned to this detail. We rode a train to about a mile of our workplace, and then we walked the rest of the way. And we got there, and there was a small building. The farmers in this area had arranged to have this building for us, and they had a little bunk for each soldier, and each one was assigned to a farmer. But the farmers in this area had their houses built in a cluster for protection, but it was an old community, and everybody was assigned to a farmer, and it seemed that I got the better deal of the the farmers. There's a farmer who had a stroke and wasn't able to work. He had 2 daughters, well, and a son also, and his son had been in the Army, and he was out now, but he had to work for the government. And the 2 girls had the responsibility of running the farm. They had 12 cows they milked, and the cows was in the barn, and the barn was part of the house. And you opened the hall door, and there was the barn. And their mode of transportation and power for everything was a yoke of oxen. And, you know, I'd never driven oxen or anything, but I learned to drive oxen there. And they were very good to me. The mother, Mrs. Moser, she treated me like one of her kids. And she was very nice, and I ate at the table with them. They had a potato diet pretty well, but they seemed to have plenty of bread, and they had butter, and they had sweets. They had jelly and good food, really. And I enjoyed that, and I worked for them. And the man next door could speak English, and he spent a lot of time talking to me. It was a great experience, and I've been back several times. I took all my kids over. They visited with the family. They were very good to me. The Mosers had a radio. They didn't listen at it much. They were restricted to one station. They could not listen to any other station. They might get some propaganda. But they would let me change the radio dial, and I could get BBC in London, and I could hear their story about how the war was going. But it was kind of strange when I would do that. The Germans, they'd go somewhere else. They didn't stay there to watch that. They didn't know that I was changing that. But of course they knew it, but they walked away. And I thought the war was going to be over before that, or at least the British thought that. On April 30th, 1945, I left the barracks early to have breakfast with the Mosers. I was fortunate enough to be the only prisoner there that got to eat with the family. But on the way, there was 3 black cars came by with guards on them, and of course my heart was beating pretty fast. I was concerned that they was sitting there with guns and I was unprotected, but they paid no attention to me. First car goes by and just a driver and the guards on top. Second car just about even with me, and the one in front stopped, and it stopped, and there sat Adolf Hitler. He wasn't more than 5 or 6 feet from me. He was in the car. It had the glass up, but I was looking through the glass, and the guard was sitting on the car. I could reach up and touch him, but nobody said a word. But for some 3 minutes or so, that seemed like an eternity to me. But on they go, and there was 3 small planes had landed in a pasture some 200 yards away, and the 3 cars go down near them. I see 3 people go over and get in the planes. And they had little ladders to help them get up because it was a higher plane than our small plane. And the planes took off one after another, and I didn't see them anymore, and the cars went out of sight. But I go on to the Mosers, and at the Mosers there was a lot of excitement, and Ms. Moser told me the Fuhrer spent the night with Mr. Pullen, and Mr. Pullen was a wealthy man in town and had known Adolf Hitler before that in their earlier life sometime. So it was quite a day for the people in Neusdorf, and Ms. Moser was protective of me, and she didn't want me outside. She was afraid that I might get shot or something. So I asked for a piece of paper, and I wrote a note to the military authorities that Hitler had spent the night with Mr. Pullen, and they'd left in small plane.